Hey there, and welcome to True Scary Stories. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. That helps YouTube know you love creepy stories, and it'll keep sending more your way.
3 True Thanksgiving Horror Stories. Today, I'm sharing 3 absolutely bone-chilling Thanksgiving horror stories that I've collected from viewers over the years. These aren't your typical creepy tales. No, these are the kind of stories that remind you that sometimes the scariest things happen during the times we're supposed to feel the safest, when we're surrounded by family, in our own homes, on holidays. So make sure your doors are locked, get comfortable, and prepare yourself. Because these 3 stories? They're going to stay with you long after Thanksgiving dinner is over. Let's begin. Story 1. The Uninvited Guest. This first story comes from a viewer named Marcus, and it happened about 8 years ago during Thanksgiving dinner. And I gotta tell you, even reading through his account gave me chills. So Marcus was living in this old Victorian house in rural Massachusetts with his wife Sarah and their 2 kids. The house was perfect. It had character, you know? Old wooden beams, creaky hardwood floors, the kind of place that makes you feel like you're living in history. But old houses have their quirks. They have their sounds. And sometimes those sounds are just the house settling. Sometimes they're not. It was the day before Thanksgiving, and Sarah's entire family was driving up to stay for the holiday. Marcus was in the kitchen preparing some of the food, prepping vegetables, getting things ready. Sarah was upstairs with the kids, getting the guest rooms cleaned and ready. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly how a day before Thanksgiving should feel. Around 4 p.m., Marcus heard the front door open. He heard it clear as day, that distinct creak of the old hinges, followed by the soft click of it closing. He wasn't expecting anyone. Sarah was still upstairs, the kids were playing in their rooms. So Marcus walked out into the living room, and nothing. The door was closed. It was locked. There was nobody there. He figured it was just the wind. Old houses do that sometimes, right? Drafts can push doors open. He went back to the kitchen and didn't think much of it. But then it happened again. 20 minutes later. Same sound. Same creak. Same soft click. This time, Marcus felt something different. He felt that prickling sensation on the back of his neck. You know the one, when you know something's off, even if you can't explain why. He went to the door again. Locked. Definitely locked. He even checked the windows in the living room. Everything was secure. He called up to Sarah and asked if she'd heard anything. She said no, she'd been upstairs the whole time with the music on. Marcus told himself he was being paranoid. It was Thanksgiving season. His mind was probably just in overdrive from all the preparation and stress. So he tried to shake it off and went back to cooking. But here's where it gets really disturbing. Around 6 p.m., Sarah came down with the kids and said she was going to run to the store for a few last-minute items. She'd be gone about 30 minutes, she said. Marcus said okay, gave her a kiss, and watched them drive away. He was alone in the house now. He was working on a sauce when he heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from upstairs. He stopped what he was doing. His heart started beating faster. He stood there in the kitchen, listening. The footsteps were moving across what sounded like the master bedroom. Slow. Methodical. Like someone was walking back and forth, pacing. Marcus grabbed his phone. His hands were shaking. He quietly walked to the bottom of the stairs and listened. The footsteps stopped. Complete silence. Then, they started again. Different direction this time. Coming toward the stairs. That's when Marcus ran to the front door, locked it, even though it was already locked, and immediately called the police. He told them someone was in his house. That he could hear them walking around upstairs. His voice was shaking so badly that the dispatcher had to ask him to repeat everything twice. The police arrived in about 8 minutes. 8 minutes that felt like 8 hours. Marcus waited outside in the cold, watching the police officers walk up to his front door, flashlights in hand. They entered the house cautiously. He could hear them moving through the rooms, opening closets, checking under beds. 10 minutes passed. 15 minutes. Then the police officer came back out and called Marcus over. They'd searched the entire house, top to bottom. There was nobody there. All the doors and windows were locked from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry. Nothing was missing or disturbed. The officers told Marcus it was probably just the house settling, maybe an animal in the walls. But you could tell by their faces, by the way they were looking at him, that they didn't entirely believe that either. One of them asked Marcus to walk through the house with them one more time, just to make sure everything felt normal to him. As they were walking upstairs, they stopped at one of the guest bedrooms. The window was open. Just barely open, like someone had cracked it just a few inches. Marcus swore, absolutely swore, that he and Sarah had checked all the windows that morning and they were all closed and locked. The police closed it, locked it, and finished their search. They told Marcus to call them if anything else happened, and they left. But that night Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about those footsteps. He kept replaying that sound in his head. And he kept thinking about that window. The next morning was Thanksgiving Day. Sarah's family started arriving around noon. Everyone was happy, everyone was excited. Marcus tried to act normal, but he was on edge. All day, he kept thinking about what had happened. He kept wondering if there was something, or someone, he was missing. That evening, after dinner, after everyone had eaten and the kitchen was finally clean, Marcus was sitting in the living room with his brother-in-law, watching football. Sarah was upstairs getting the kids ready for bed. And that's when Marcus's brother-in-law said something that made his blood run cold. He said, "Hey man, who's that guy? The one who helped Sarah in the kitchen earlier?" Marcus felt his stomach drop. "What guy?" he asked. "The older guy. Older guy, kind of graying hair, wore a dark jacket. He came in through the back door while we were eating dinner. I saw him in the kitchen helping Sarah with something. He seemed like a friend of the family or something." Marcus stood up so fast he knocked over his beer. "Describe him. Describe him exactly." His brother-in-law was confused, but he described the man. Older, weathered-looking, dark jacket, gray hair. Marcus ran to the back door. It was unlocked. He ran back to the kitchen where Sarah was just coming down the stairs. "Sarah, who was that man in the kitchen?" Sarah looked confused. "What man? I was alone the whole time after dinner." Marcus felt like his chest was going to explode. His brother-in-law had seen someone, a stranger, in their house, with their children there. He immediately checked all the doors and windows. Everything was locked. He got his brother-in-law to describe the man again, and this time, he was even more specific. The description, he said, matched one of the old photographs hanging in their hallway, a photograph of the previous owner of the house. The man who had lived there decades ago and passed away. Marcus went upstairs, got the photograph, showed it to his brother-in-law. His brother-in-law went pale. He said, "Yeah, that's him. That's the guy I saw." To this day, Marcus doesn't know if his brother-in-law actually saw someone or if his mind played a trick on him that day. But what he does know is that something was in that house on Thanksgiving. Something that could open doors and walk through rooms. Something that didn't need to use doors at all. He and his family don't live in that house anymore. Story 2. Dinner with the Past. This next story is even more unsettling because it involves a family tradition that, in hindsight, might not have been a tradition at all. This story comes from a woman named Jennifer, and she was kind enough to share it with me via email. Jennifer grew up in Colorado, in this small mountain town, and her family always had this thing they did on Thanksgiving. Every year, without fail, Jennifer's mother would set an extra place at the dinner table. A place for someone who was no longer with them. Jennifer's grandfather had passed away when she was very young. She barely remembered him. But every Thanksgiving, her mother would set a place for him. A plate, silverware, a glass of water. And there was this old family rule: nobody asked about it. Nobody mentioned it. You just accepted it. It was tradition. Jennifer thought this was normal. She thought every family did this. It wasn't until she was in high school and invited a friend over for Thanksgiving that she realized how strange this actually was. Her friend Emma came over, and Emma saw the extra place setting. Emma asked, "Who's that for?" And Jennifer just answered, "Oh, that's for my grandfather." Emma was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "But your grandfather is dead, right?" That question stuck with Jennifer. It made her realize that maybe this wasn't as normal as she'd always thought. But her mother insisted it was just a way to honor his memory, to keep him present during the holiday. And as the years went by, Jennifer kind of accepted it again. It was just something her family did. But here's where the story takes a turn. When Jennifer was in her mid-20s, her mother got sick. Really sick. Pancreatic cancer. She passed away in the spring of that year. Jennifer was devastated, obviously. And that Thanksgiving, the first Thanksgiving without her mother, Jennifer decided to do something in her memory. She decided to set that extra place, like her mother always did. But this time, Jennifer set 2 extra places. One for her grandfather, and one for her mother. Her husband and her kids were living with her at the time, and they all gathered around the table. Jennifer's husband looked a bit uncomfortable about the empty seats. But he didn't say anything. The kids were too young to really understand or care. Jennifer started to serve the food. Turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, all of it. She placed food on the 2 empty plates, just like her mother used to do. It felt right. It felt like honoring them both. But then something happened that made her freeze. Her daughter, who was about 7 years old at the time, looked at the 2 empty chairs and said, "Mommy, why are Grandma and Grandpa making faces at me?" Jennifer felt her blood go cold. "What do you mean, honey? Making faces?" "They're smiling," her daughter said matter-of-factly. "Grandma's smiling real big, and Grandpa is smiling too." Jennifer's husband looked at her with this confused expression. Jennifer tried to laugh it off. "Oh, sweetie, the shadows are just playing tricks on you. Eat your food." But her daughter kept staring at the empty chairs. "No, Mommy. They're really there. Can't you see them? Grandma's waving at me." That's when Jennifer's son, who was only 5, suddenly said, "Yeah, I see them too. They're nice. They're not scary." Jennifer's hands started shaking. She couldn't eat. She couldn't speak. She just sat there, watching her children stare at the 2 empty chairs with this calm expression on their faces, like they were looking at people they saw every day. After dinner, Jennifer put the kids to bed and immediately called her husband into the living room. She told him what the kids had said. Her husband tried to rationalize it. "Kids have wild imaginations," he said. "They feed off each other's ideas. They probably just saw her staring at the chairs and made up a story to match." But Jennifer knew her kids. And she knew that her daughter had been the first to say something. Her son had only chimed in after hearing his sister speak. That night, Jennifer couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about her mother's tradition. She kept wondering if her mother had seen something too. If that's why she always set those extra places. If maybe, just maybe, those chairs weren't ever actually empty. She did some research. She looked up her grandfather's name. His full name, his dates, everything. And then she searched for information about her family house. She wanted to know if anyone else had ever lived there. Anyone else who had died there. What she found made her wish she'd never looked. A man matching her grandfather's description had died in that house. But not naturally. He died by his own hand in the basement during the 1950s. Her grandmother had discovered him on Thanksgiving Day evening. Thanksgiving. The exact holiday that her family had been honoring him on for decades. Jennifer didn't know if her mother had known this. She suspected she did. She suspected her mother had set that place every year because her mother had set it every year before her. A chain of women, all the way back, all honoring something, or preventing something, by maintaining this family tradition. Jennifer hasn't set an extra place since that Thanksgiving. She told her husband everything, the research, the history, all of it. She told her kids that Grandma and Grandpa had gone to a different place and wouldn't be visiting anymore. But you know what's strange? Ever since that year, Jennifer's children have both been diagnosed with sleep paralysis. Multiple times a year, they wake up unable to move, unable to scream. And both of them have reported the same thing during these episodes. They see two figures standing over their beds, smiling. Jennifer sometimes wonders if by stopping the tradition, by turning away from it, she broke something that had been protecting her family all along. She wonders if those empty chairs were never supposed to be empty. And now, every Thanksgiving, as Jennifer sits down to dinner with her family, there are always 3 chairs she can't quite bring herself to get rid of. 3 chairs that are always empty. 3 chairs that she sometimes, just sometimes, catches a reflection of something sitting in them. She hasn't told her husband about those reflections. Story 3, Leftovers. This final story is probably the one that disturbed me the most when I first read it. It's short, it's simple, but it's absolutely terrifying. And it comes from a man named David, who experienced it just 2 years ago. David lives in Ohio with his wife Rebecca. They're both in their late 30s. They have a pretty normal life, nothing too dramatic. For Thanksgiving, David's brother and his brother's wife were coming over to celebrate. It was going to be a small dinner, just the 4 of them. Rebecca had been cooking all day. Turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, gravy, all the classics. The house smelled incredible. David kept sneaking tastes of everything when Rebecca wasn't looking. By the time his brother and sister-in-law arrived, David was already starving. They sat down to eat around 6 p.m. The food was amazing. They ate, they laughed, they drank wine, and it was just a really nice, normal Thanksgiving evening. By around 8 p.m., they were finishing up. There was still quite a bit of food left over. That's always the case with Thanksgiving, right? You cook way too much. Rebecca started packing up the leftovers into containers. Turkey went into one, stuffing into another, and so on. There was a lot of it. The fridge was going to be packed. David's brother made a joke about how they'd be eating turkey sandwiches for a week. They all laughed. Around 9 p.m., his brother and sister-in-law headed out to go home. David and Rebecca cleaned up the remaining dishes and headed to bed around 10:30. David fell asleep pretty quickly. He was full, content, and happy. But then, around 2 in the morning, he woke up. At first, he didn't know why he'd woken up. It was dark. Rebecca was asleep next to him. Everything seemed normal. But then he heard it, the refrigerator door opening downstairs. David laid there in bed, listening. The fridge door closed. A few seconds later, he heard the sound of containers being moved around. Someone was in his kitchen. Someone was going through his leftovers. David's heart started pounding. He nudged Rebecca awake and whispered, "Someone's in the house." Rebecca was groggy at first, but when she heard the sound of the fridge door opening again, she was suddenly very awake. David grabbed his phone and called 911. He told the dispatcher someone had broken into his house and was in his kitchen. The dispatcher told him to get somewhere safe and lock the door, and that police were on the way. David and Rebecca locked themselves in the bedroom. They could hear someone moving around downstairs. Footsteps. The sound of the fridge door opening and closing. Multiple times. Like whoever was down there was eating. The police arrived in about 7 minutes. Again, that agonizing wait, while you're listening to a stranger eat your food and walk around your house. The police officers banged on the door and announced themselves. Everything went quiet downstairs. The officers entered the house. David and Rebecca heard them moving through the kitchen, the living room. They heard one of the officers say, "Clear." They heard this repeated as the officers checked every room. After what felt like an eternity, one of the officers came up to the bedroom and told David and Rebecca they could come down. The house was secure. There was nobody inside. David went downstairs with the police. He immediately looked at his fridge. It was closed. He opened it. The leftovers were still there. The turkey container, the stuffing container, all of them. They didn't look disturbed. They all looked exactly how Rebecca had left them. David checked his back door. Locked. His front door. Locked. All his windows. Locked. One of the police officers asked David if he'd maybe just been dreaming. Maybe sleepwalking had made him think someone was in the house. David swore he wasn't dreaming. He'd been wide awake. Rebecca confirmed that he'd woken her up and she'd heard the sounds too. The police didn't find any evidence of forced entry. They couldn't find any indication that anyone had actually been in the house. They left after about 30 minutes, and David and Rebecca were left alone, confused and shaken. They went back to bed, but neither of them slept for the rest of the night. The next morning, David got up and was going to make some breakfast. He opened the fridge to get something, and he noticed something off. The turkey container. It was open. It wasn't sealed. It had been sealed when Rebecca packed it up. It had been sealed when the police checked the house. But now it was open. David opened the container fully. And here's where things get really disturbing. About half of the turkey was gone. Actually eaten. Cut away. Missing. It wasn't like someone had just pawed at it. Someone, or something, had actually eaten it. There were knife marks on what was left. David immediately took a photo and showed Rebecca. Rebecca felt sick. She was certain she'd sealed that container. She was certain it had been closed. And the police had checked the fridge. It had been closed then too. David and Rebecca decided to put all the leftovers in the garbage. Rebecca couldn't bear the thought of eating any of it now. David called the police back and told them what he'd found. The police officer who came out didn't really have an explanation. It was possible, he said, that David had been sleepwalking and had eaten the turkey himself without remembering it. But that didn't make sense to David. He would remember eating half a turkey. His sleepwalking had never been that severe before. And Rebecca had seen him asleep in bed when she woke up. She swore he hadn't gotten out of bed between the time she fell asleep and the time the police left. Over the next week, David and Rebecca kept the doors and windows locked. They slept with a baseball bat by the bed. Nothing else happened. Whatever had eaten the turkey didn't come back. But here's the part that's kept David up at night ever since. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, Rebecca got really, really sick. She had severe food poisoning. The worst food poisoning David had ever seen. She was sick for days. She couldn't keep anything down. When she finally went to the doctor, they ran some tests. The doctor asked if she'd eaten anything unusual recently, anything that might have been spoiled or contaminated. Rebecca said no, not that she could think of. The doctor prescribed her antibiotics and told her to rest and drink plenty of fluids. But David couldn't stop thinking about the turkey. He started researching food poisoning. He learned that some food poisoning symptoms can take weeks to develop, depending on the bacteria. He learned about certain types of bacteria that can hide in poultry. He learned about Listeria and Salmonella and all these horrible things. And then he had a thought that terrified him. What if something had eaten some of the turkey before David and Rebecca had even put it away? What if that's how the bacteria had gotten on it? What if something sick, something diseased, had eaten the turkey during the night, and then Rebecca, when she ate some of the leftovers the next day, had gotten infected? David asked Rebecca if she'd eaten any of the turkey after Thanksgiving. Rebecca thought for a moment and then said yes. She'd had a turkey sandwich the next day for lunch, before she got sick. What would he even tell them? That he thought some mysterious creature had eaten his turkey and infected his wife? They'd think he was insane. David and Rebecca moved 6 months later. They couldn't bear to stay in that house anymore. But before they left, David did something that Rebecca didn't know about at the time. He set up a camera in the kitchen. He set it to record at night, every night for a week. When David reviewed the footage, he found something that changed everything. On one of the nights, the third night of recording, the camera caught something. Around 2 a.m., the fridge door opened. But nobody walked into the kitchen. Nobody approached the fridge. The door just opened. By itself. Like invisible hands were pulling it. The fridge stayed open for about 3 minutes. And then, the contents inside started moving. Containers were shifting around, like something was searching for something. Something you couldn't see was rifling through David's leftovers. Then the fridge door closed. David has never shown this footage to anyone. He uploaded it to his private cloud, but he hasn't posted it anywhere. He's afraid of what would happen if he did. But he watches it sometimes. Late at night, he watches that footage and he remembers that sound. That sound of the fridge door opening and closing in the middle of the night. He remembers the turkey that was eaten from the inside out. And he remembers that his wife got sick right after eating from that container. Whatever was in his kitchen that night, it wasn't human. And David is fairly certain it's still hungry. Well, folks, there you have it. 3 Thanksgiving horror stories that I personally found absolutely chilling. The kind of stories that make you want to check all your doors and windows before bed. The kind of stories that make you wonder what might be happening in your house when you're asleep. What would he even tell them? That he thought some mysterious creature had eaten his turkey and infected his wife? They'd think he was insane. David and Rebecca moved 6 months later. They couldn't bear to stay in that house anymore. But before they left, David did something that Rebecca didn't know about at the time. He set up a camera in the kitchen. He set it to record at night, every night for a week. When David reviewed the footage, he found something that changed everything. On one of the nights, the third night of recording, the camera caught something. Around 2 a.m., the fridge door opened. But nobody walked into the kitchen. Nobody approached the fridge. The door just opened. By itself. Like invisible hands were pulling it. The fridge stayed open for about 3 minutes. And then, the contents inside started moving. Containers were shifting around, like something was searching for something. Something you couldn't see was rifling through David's leftovers. Then the fridge door closed. David has never shown this footage to anyone. He uploaded it to his private cloud, but he hasn't posted it anywhere. He's afraid of what would happen if he did. But he watches it sometimes. Late at night, he watches that footage and he remembers that sound. That sound of the fridge door opening and closing in the middle of the night. He remembers the turkey that was eaten from the inside out. And he remembers that his wife got sick right after eating from that container. Whatever was in his kitchen that night, it wasn't human. And David is fairly certain it's still hungry. Well, folks, there you have it. 3 Thanksgiving horror stories that I personally found absolutely chilling. The kind of stories that make you want to check all your doors and windows before bed. The kind of stories that make you wonder what might be happening in your house when you're asleep.